The morning mist clung to the marble columns of the imperial palace like ghostly fingers. Empress Lydia stood at her chamber window, watching the sun rise slowly over her vast kingdom. At 43, she had ruled for nearly 2 decades, yet the weight of the crown felt heavier with each passing day. Below in the courtyard, servants hurried about their morning duties. Guards marched in perfect formation along the palace walls. Everything appeared orderly, peaceful, prosperous. Yet Lydia knew the truth that lay beneath this serene surface. "Your Majesty," came a soft voice behind her. Margaret, her most trusted advisor and childhood friend, entered carrying the morning reports. "The council awaits your presence." Lydia turned from the window with a gentle sigh. Margaret had been with her since they were young girls, long before crowns and kingdoms complicated their friendship. If anyone could see past the imperial facade, it was her. "What news today, Margaret?" Lydia asked, settling in her chair by the fire. Margaret's expression grew troubled. "The usual reports, Your Majesty. Crime continues to rise in the outer districts. The prisons overflow with thieves and murderers. The people grow restless. This has been a pattern for months now." Despite Lydia's efforts to improve conditions for her subjects, desperation seemed to breed more desperation. The kingdom's prosperity had not reached everyone, and those left behind had turned to violence and theft. "And our current methods of punishment?" Lydia inquired, though she already knew the answer. "Proving ineffective," Margaret replied carefully. "The threat of imprisonment no longer deters criminal behavior. Some even seem to prefer the certainty of prison meals to the uncertainty of honest poverty." Lydia rose and walked to her private study, where maps and documents covered every surface. Margaret followed, closing the door behind them. Here, away from the formality of court, they could speak freely as the friends they had always been. "There's something else," Margaret said quietly. "The people have begun calling you names." "What names?" Margaret hesitated. "They whisper that you are weak, that your mercy enables more crime. Some even call you the soft empress who cares more for criminals than victims." The words stung, but Lydia had heard whispers before. She moved to a large painting on the wall, a beautiful landscape showing rolling hills dotted with wildflowers. But it wasn't just any landscape. It was a carefully detailed map of her private sanctuary, a place few knew existed. "Margaret," Lydia said slowly, "would you like to see something that might change your understanding of everything?" Her friend nodded, curious. Lydia touched a hidden mechanism behind the painting. A section of the wall slid away, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward. Cool air drifted up from below, carrying the scent of earth and growing things. "Where does this lead?" Margaret asked. "To the truth," Lydia replied, taking a torch from the wall. "To what I've really been doing with all those prisoners everyone thinks I'm too soft on." They descended in silence, their footsteps echoing off stone walls. The staircase seemed to go on forever, spiraling deeper beneath the palace. Finally, they emerged into a vast underground chamber illuminated by shafts of sunlight streaming through cleverly concealed openings above. Margaret gasped. Before them stretched an enormous garden unlike anything she had ever seen. Carefully tended plots of vegetables grew in neat rows. Fruit trees heavy with harvest-lined walking paths. Flowers bloomed in riots of color between herb gardens and grain fields. The air hummed with the sound of bees and the gentle lowing of cattle in distant pastures. But most surprising of all were the people. Dozens of men and women worked throughout the garden, tending plants, caring for animals, building and repairing structures. They wore simple, clean clothes and moved with purpose and dignity. "Margaret," Lydia said softly, "meet my prisoners." A woman approached them, her hands dirty from working in the soil, but her face bright with genuine pleasure. "Good morning, Your Majesty," she said with a respectful bow. "The tomatoes are coming in beautifully this season." "Thank you, Sarah," Lydia replied warmly. "How is your son adjusting to his studies?" "Very well, Your Majesty. Master James says he has a real talent for mathematics." As Sarah returned to her work, Margaret stared in amazement. I don't understand. The reports say you feed prisoners to wild animals. Lydia smiled sadly. In a way, I suppose I do. She gestured to where a man was feeding scraps to a pen full of chickens, while another tended to goats. I feed them to the wild animals of their own nature. Their hunger for purpose, their need for dignity, their desire to contribute something meaningful to the world. They walked deeper into the garden, past workshops where prisoners crafted furniture and wove cloth, past classrooms where others learned to read and write, past a small clinic where a former thief had become the community's healer. When someone commits a crime in my kingdom, Lydia explained, they disappear from the world above. Officially, they are gone forever. But down here, they have a chance to become someone new, to feed the better angels of their nature instead of the demons. Margaret watched a group of children playing under the supervision of several adults. Those children, sons and daughters of the workers here. Rather than break up families, we bring them too. The children attend school and know nothing of their parents' former lives. To them, this is simply home. They pause by a memorial garden where names were carved into stone tablets. These are the ones we lost to sickness or old age, Lydia said. They live their final years in peace, contributing to something larger than themselves. But the cruelty reports the stories of your viciousness. Margaret began. Carefully crafted, Lydia admitted. If word spread that imprisonment in my kingdom meant productive work, good food, education, and dignity, every criminal in neighboring lands would flock here. The fear keeps them away while giving my people the justice they believe they need. An older man approached, carrying a basket of fresh bread. Your Majesty, he said, the evening meal is nearly ready. Will you be joining us tonight? Perhaps, Thomas. Save me some of that excellent bread you make. After he left, Margaret asked, what was his crime? He killed a man in a drunken rage 20 years ago, left behind a wife and 3 children with nothing. Lydia's voice grew gentle. Thomas has spent every day since then baking bread that feeds dozens of people. His skill has prevented more hunger than his single act of violence ever caused. They climbed to a viewing platform that overlooked the entire underground kingdom. Hundreds of people moved about their daily lives with purpose and contentment. Children laughed in the distance. The sound of singing drifted from one of the workshops. This is why I never married, Lydia said quietly. This has been my life's work. Every criminal who disappears into my cruelty is really disappearing into a chance for redemption. But it requires constant attention, careful management, and absolute secrecy. Margaret was quiet for a long time, absorbing everything she had seen. Finally, she asked, what happens when people complete their sentences? Lydia pointed to several people working near the entrance. Some choose to stay and help run things. Others graduate back to the surface world with new identities and skills. We help them start fresh in distant cities where their past won't follow them. And if they commit crimes again, it happens sometimes, but far less often than you might expect. When people discover they have value, that they can create rather than destroy, most choose to keep building. As they made their way back to the surface, Margaret struggled with everything she had learned. The kingdom above thinks you're a monster. And that serves my purpose, Lydia replied. Fear prevents crime better than actual cruelty ever could. Meanwhile, those who do fall into darkness find light again down here. Back in her chambers, Lydia returned to her window. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere below her feet, hundreds of people were sitting down to dinner together, their children playing nearby, their hands tired from honest work. Will you keep my secret? She asked Margaret. Of course, her friend replied. But Lydia, don't you ever want recognition for what you've really built? The Empress smiled, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. History will remember me as the insane Empress who fed prisoners to wild animals. But the people living full lives beneath my feet will remember me differently. Their children, grandchildren will carry forward what they've learned about second chances and human dignity. She paused, her voice growing soft with satisfaction. Sometimes the greatest kindness looks like cruelty from the outside. And sometimes the most important work is the work that remains hidden. I sleep peacefully knowing that every night, hundreds of people who once brought darkness into the world are instead creating light. Margaret joined her at the window, and together they watched the palace gardens settle into evening quiet. Below them, invisible to the world above, a different kind of kingdom thrived in the gentle darkness, fed by compassion disguised as severity, sustained by hope masquerading as fear. The insane empress smiled and prepared for another day of her secret reign.